All right, so what'd you make of it?
Oh, well, I think your recap was pretty right on. There's a certain level of gravitas that's associated with a presidential announcement, right? I mean, you remember President Trump coming down the golden escalator or President Obama in Springfield, Illinois. There's a certain timelessness that you seek to capture because it's the only day, literally the only day during a campaign when the corporate media can't actually ruin your story provided you tell it. And I think that's what is frustrating so many supporters of Ron DeSantis and a whole bunch of people who thought, this is going to be a one-on-one race till the end. We're hoping that he would have the kind of bump that he had in Election Day 2022 when he came out in prime time, first Republican to speak with this massive election in Florida, huge win, and people were expecting great things. I think people were hoping that we would reset that, and that certainly did not happen yesterday.
I mean, I have to be honest. I am somebody whose vote is available to somebody like Ron DeSantis. He could definitely get me to vote for him. I was asking myself last night, who else is there? Who else? Right? Because you got Trump, who's going to be under 4 indictments by the time we get to Election Day. And this guy does not look like a man who can get it across the finish line. He just doesn't. The closer look you get at him, the less steady he seems. And it is unsteadying for people who do not believe in the direction this country's going in right now under Joe Biden. It's scary.
Yeah, well, the whole thing has been exacerbated by the fact that he's had 6 months basically from his peak popularity to the time of this announcement. And in the interim, you have a whole bunch of other questions. You mentioned what was happening with President Trump, potentially more legal issues. And then you have the announcements of other people like Tim Scott or Nikki Haley, people who are not polling anywhere near where Ron DeSantis is, who would consolidate a lot of people in the conservative movement who basically didn't want to do another round of President Trump, but kind of liked the policies that were pursued by the Trump administration. And I think that it does provide a little bit of an opportunity for other candidates to try to make the case that they would be better suited to consolidate it. All that being said, Megyn, I don't think this is fatal by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, if he posts a big fundraising number, which it looks like he probably will in the next couple of days, and they go out and they do some real events out around this country, he can get this thing back on track. But it's certainly not the way that you want to start, because usually it's your announcement that gives you the bump and springboards you back into where they hope this race will go.
Mm-hmm. That event would have been fine on day 2.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
On day 2, right? You sit with Elon, sit with David Sachs, have your supporters and people we know call in and ask you these questions, these fawning questions. But that not on night 1. It was boring. It was like the Q&A was a bore. I wrote down, I had this epic text chain going with my team. I'm sure you guys at Ruthless had a similar one, which I'd love to see. And here, one of my producers wrote, "This makes CNN's Trump town hall look like an Emmy Award-winning broadcast in comparison." Elon was sort of back to me. He kept bringing it back to him, that he and David were having discussions about tech and Twitter. I wrote to my team, "Is DeSantis still there?" This is not the way it should have gone.
Yeah, no, it's not. And you worry a little bit about that because it's not just the platform. I mean, look, there might be a little bit too much too online, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
There's what you want to do with the beginning of a presidential campaign is broaden out as wide as you can to get everybody sort of intrigued by it. And then you can narrow in on different audiences and make sure that they understand you get what they're concerned about. But when you're real narrow, like they were with Twitter, you're starting to just convey that maybe this is something that some Silicon Valley guys or some sort of libertarian leaning conservatives are all about, but then the rest of the Republican Party may not quite see eye to eye. Now, I don't know if that's true. And honestly, Megyn, you covered it in your recap at the beginning. The policies that Ron DeSantis has been promoting for the last 2 years tell the story in and of themselves. The problem is that he didn't tell that story. I think he tried a little bit, but when you choose an audio medium, I mean, it's not, look, Twitter could be the best broadcast in the history of the world at some point. It is not today. And what you got was an audio only medium, then in all honesty, like you'd have been better off on AM radio. I mean, it just didn't convey the sense of gravitas, the sense of importance, or the audaciousness of a campaign to run against a former president, which is, of course, what he's up to here.
Holmes, they were having conversations about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Bitcoin. All right. Now, I realize some people are interested in that, but on a presidential announcement, all I could think about was my imaginary viewer, Madge, who is in Iowa. She's been my imaginary viewer since the beginning of my anchoring career. Madge, first of all, does not know how to use Twitter Spaces. She doesn't understand that at all. But maybe she tried to get on and she listened and lasted for all this. Madge did not need to hear the words central bank cryptocurrency, which were uttered last. Madge couldn't give two shits about that. Yeah. And they spent long amounts of time on it.
I know it. And look, I love Sachs. And I think what Elon Musk has done for Twitter is the single most patriotic thing I've seen a billionaire do in my lifetime.
Same.
All that being said, I don't expect Elon and Sachs to have sort of vision for America that I'm parroting amongst the masses. I mean, we've got a hell of an economy that is really having a tough time for a lot of Americans out there. Why don't we start there? And then you can move in through all of the, the wokeness and the critiques of modern culture that has made DeSantis so popular on the right. You don't really need to get into niche stuff on day one. And I don't know if they didn't see that coming or if this just wasn't overly scripted. Look, they want to do this again. I mean, that I think is the takeaway, that there's just no chance this is ultimately what they wanted to convey on day one.
Let me tell you why I wrote the sentence, I miss journalists, the shocking sentence, I miss journalists, because I was thinking about my old pal, Brett Baer. I was thinking about the way I would have done an interview with this guy right after this. And there's an arc to telling somebody's story. And yes, there should have been some spice in there, something that would make news, which is good for him, right? To have some sort of contentious dust up with the reporter. That's good. That's good for him. Just ask Trump. He understands that implicitly. But also, there should have been some questions that got to, for lack of a better term, the heart of the matter. Mm-hmm. People are really hurting right now. Or the Democrats' messaging has been so divisive. This is what they're actually telling little kids, that they're less than because they were born into a certain race, right? Like, what about that upsets you so much? Why have you spent so much of your time in the governor's mansion focused on that stuff, which, the left dismisses as insignificant culture wars? Mm-hmm. Let him speak from the heart about why that stuff is important to him, as opposed to just like this random cast of characters on, like, even Chris Rufo, who I love, but it was like, CRT and DEI. Madge doesn't know what the hell that is. Like, it was just a miss from, I don't know who orchestrated the whole thing. I assume it was Team DeSantis, but they don't understand how to storytell.
Yeah, look, if you just back up to what you want conveyed to the entire country, because again, you get one day, your announcement day, when everybody's forced to cover you. And as long as you're scripted on that one day and you have the right images, the media doesn't have any choice but to cover you. Sure, they can put some shitty narration over the top of it or try to, talk about where you're at in the polls. But for the most part, the images that you convey and the sentences that you write to say are going to be the only things that are conveyed to a larger audience. And then by every other standard, you have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you go do a tour of the country and you sit down and do those interviews that you were talking about, Megyn, and you start putting some meat on the bones. And hell, if you get into a conversation about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency at some point down the road, terrific. But what you lead with is not that. You've got to have a much broader, much more significant announcement that stands the test of time. And, again, this was a miss. I don't think it's fatal. I think they can figure out how to get back on their feet here, but it is not good.
The other piece of it is, if you're making a presidential announcement, don't sit next to Beyonce while doing it. You should be the biggest star in the room. You should be the most interesting person in the room. And he wasn't. Mm-hmm. He wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, we will maybe never know how all this came about, whose idea it was. Obviously there's been a huge revolution on the right as it comes to Twitter and Elon and, the interest in Tucker Carlson now after he leaves Fox. And so you understand the niche marketplace. And I get sort of toying around with doing an idea to make that central to an announcement. You just don't make it the announcement.
Some people take CBD for better sleep or less stress and more calm in their lives. Some take it for pain relief, better energy, or better focus and concentration. Today, I want to tell you about CB Distillery. CB Distillery, and there are over 2 million satisfied customers. According to a poll of their customers, 90% reported they sleep better with CBD. 81% said CBD helps with stress, and 80% said CBD helps with aches and pains after physical activity. If you struggle to get a good night's sleep, and if you're dealing with too much stress and could just use a little calm in your life, if you suffer with pain and discomfort, especially after physical exercise, you could give CBD a try from cbdistillery.com. Use my 20% discount by visiting cbdistillery.com and enter my initials MK for your discount. No prescription is required. That's cbdistillery.com, promo code MK for 20% off, cbdistillery.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.